The Lenfest report was probably one of the biggest syntheses that has been done exploring ecosystem models around the world, and they gave some prescriptive guidelines on how these fisheries should be managed.
The Lenfest report made some very broad, sweeping generalizations about how forage fish should be managed and recommended that those standards should be adopted in all forage fisheries unless there had been a more detailed specific analysis. Now what's been found since their report is that where they've been tested, they're really not very applicable. The models that were used in the Lenfest report were all built to look at the overall nature of marine ecosystems, and none of them were specifically designed to look at the impact of fishing forage fish on the predators.
There's two main modeling systems that have been used. One of them was one I developed called EcoSim. And we had noticed that there was a serious discrepancy in the predictions of these two models.
And when modeling has been done that's specifically designed to look at this effect, they found very different results and much less impact of fishing forage fish.
You would expect that if there is very low abundance of forage fish, the population of top predators would go down. And we review a pretty large data set, and we didn't find that relationship.
And what we found is there was essentially no relationship between how many forage fish there are in the ocean and how well predators do in terms of whether the populations increase or decrease.
Okay, the Lenfest conclusion that predators rise and fall with their prey populations as a generality is simply not true. It's not empirically true. One of the things we did in this study was to collect together a lot of time series patterns of predator abundances and forage fish abundances, and we just didn't see the correlation. Nor have other scientists that have looked at this objectively that way.
These animals has evolved together, and top predators have somehow developed some strategies of how to cope with the natural variability of these individuals.
And it's very clear and widely accepted that the populations of forage fish are largely influenced by environmental variation. And the Lenfest report and the models used in the Lenfest report did not consider this at all.
So we see periods of high recruitment and then periods of low recruitment, and it doesn't seem to be related to the stock abundance, but more to environmental conditions.
Their food, the temperature of the water, upwelling from the ocean, all those things affect sardines and cause them to fluctuate enormously naturally. And fishing is just one more factor affecting sardine abundance.
I mean, it looked reasonable that if you appropriate half of the production of a prey species by a fishery, that you can't support so much production of predators. You've taken that production away. That seemed perfectly reasonable. It just was wrong.
What we find with forage fish is that when they're at high abundance, their spatial coverage greatly spreads out. And when abundance is low, they retract to a core region. Now, if you're a predator, the place you want to put your reproductive sites is right in the core, so that even when abundance is low, you still have food in front of you. And what that means is that there's not a very good relationship between the food available to the predators and how many sardines or how many other forage fish there are, because the predators are seeing a much more stable abundance than the overall abundance. It's very important to consider the size of the fish that are eaten by the predators and the size of the fish that are taken by the fishery. So, for instance, almost all of the menhaden that are taken by striped bass are little menhaden, and the fishery takes big menhaden. And the result is you can fish really hard and not affect the abundance of little menhaden that are important to the striped bass. The Lenfest report didn't have the kind of size structure in it, so it could look at whether the fishery was taking different sizes than the predators.
The Lenfest conclusion that forage fisheries can only be managed successfully to sustain predators as well as the forage fishery by very precautionary policies and reduced harvesting is not based on any fact. It's based on model predictions, on running alternative scenarios in models that we now understand have been fundamentally flawed because of mistakes that people like me made in the development of those models. So the bottom line is that conclusion is just horseshit, and no fisheries manager should pay any attention to it. It is, in hindsight, an irresponsible recommendation. It's as irresponsible as the goofy recommendations that you hear from Sea Shepherd that all fisheries should be shut down. It has no more intellectual support than that foolish conclusion.
Forage fish provide some of the lowest environmental cost food in the world, low carbon footprint, no water use, lots of reasons that forage fish are a really environmentally friendly form of food. And to say that we should be extremely cautious in our harvesting of them because of concern that they might impact higher level predators really is a misapplication of the precautionary principle.